do you define an emergency? The Oxford English Dictionary defines it as a serious, unexpected, and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. Merriam-Webster defines it as an unforeseen combination of circumstances that calls for immediate action. So you'll forgive me if I'm more than a little bit cynical about the emergency summit in Ottawa last week to deal with our national Aboriginal child welfare crisis. Jane Philpott, the Federal Minister of Indigenous Services, and Carolyn Bennett, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, hosted a meeting of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit leaders, along with Children's Services ministers from across the country. And at the end of the meeting, no deal was signed, nothing was decided. Ottawa didn't even commit to live up to the ruling of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, which required the government to ensure that families and kids on reserve get the same level of care and service as those off reserve. So much for immediate action. But this emergency was neither unexpected nor unforeseen. Let me show you the human faces of an emergency. This is Serenity. I'm not using her last name because I can't identify her surviving siblings. Surviving. Her older brother and sister lived. Serenity didn't. She died when she was 4, not long after being placed in what's called kinship care, a form of family foster care. At the time of her death, she weighed just 8 kilograms. It's less than 18 pounds. She was suffering from profound malnutrition, from severe hypothermia, and from a fractured skull. She also had severe vaginal and anal bruising and tearing. 3 years after her death, her kinship caregivers were charged with failing to provide the necessaries of life. Their trial has yet to begin. This is Traislin's Starlight. His little light was snuffed out when he was just 2 years old. Children's Services returned him to the care of his mother. He died of head trauma. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter. This is Jay Johnson, who died at 15 months. He too had been returned to a mother who was unable to care for him, and she too is serving time now for manslaughter. This is Shalena Arcand, also returned to a family in crisis. Shalena died of blunt force trauma. Her mother is now on trial for second-degree murder and assault with a weapon. Traislin, Jay, Shalena, they didn't die in care, but they were victims of an overwhelming Indigenous child welfare crisis nonetheless. I don't have a picture of Kalijah Potts, who was beaten to death at the age of 3. But here's the woman who killed him, his foster mother, Lily Choi. No one checked her references. She wasn't properly trained, and she wasn't even licensed to care for a child as young as Kalijah. She's too now serving time for manslaughter. And those are just some of the cases I covered last year in one 12-month span for the Edmonton Journal. Between April of 2008 and December of 2017, 237 Alberta children died while receiving protective services of some kind from the province. And only 21% of those deaths were attributed to natural causes. Most of those children were Aboriginal because Aboriginal kids are grotesquely overrepresented in the foster care system in Alberta and all across Canada. An emergency? A cross-country cataclysm might be a better term. So instead of congratulating ourselves on being woke because we apologized for residential schools and for the 60s scoop, maybe we can wake up to the reality of the emergency that's happening right now in real time in this country. Maybe we can stop talking and take some immediate action.